Dome Theory, it's Jake Fischer. He is tired. He is burnt out from the opening week of free agency where he has just been. Do I get to gloat about you a little bit, Jake? Here, you've been a star this week. It's been phenomenal watching you make all these waves in the reporting game and doing what you're doing out there, just in terms of these
Thank you,
scoops.
man.
I was writing a little off-season guide over on my Patreon. If people want to go grab that Patreon, go ahead for my NBA coverage here. And I'm just going through all these different moves. I'm like, Fischer says this, Fischer says that, and you're getting a ton of scoops, man. So what's this week been like for you? Like, take people inside the 24/7 this past week of reporting and calling and texting. Like, what's the day-to-day been like the last week or two?
Definitely not 24/7, but I've had about someone's popping into the comments right now. I've had about like 5 to 6 hours of sleep every night this week, so it's not a lot, it's not enough. But it's definitely not nothing. So it's not 24 hours, but yeah. I got lucky. I'll say on Monday, an agent friend reached out and wanted some intel about potential landing spots for his player. So that ended up giving me a bunch of connections to, keep providing insight to other people around the league. And, then more information comes back and I can share it with the first guy. And then, it's a never ending cycle once you kind of get that first little bit of intel that spreads around.
So I know the commenters here are going to be hungry for more scoops. What are the Celtics doing? Blah, 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 blah. But I do want to start with your story a little bit because I have been following you for a while, back to your Globe days, me being here in Boston. Yeah, I remember that. I remember you with the Liberty Ballers. And then I remember one of the last things I actually remembered about you before this week was you getting laid off by SI, which was, sad for you and a lot of other people there, but you bounced back strong. And I was actually thinking, like, for people who are getting into this industry, just how much people told me, like, this is an industry of no, like, you're going to be denied for a bunch of different stuff. You're going to have a lot of different setbacks. And, like, really how successful you're going to be in this is based off how, like, you bounce back from something like that, being laid off there. So what was that period like for you? Like the SI days, being laid off, and then like the short aftermath of that?
Yeah, I think for people who, and thank you for, following along and supporting along the way. I appreciate it. When I got laid off, I was fortunate that I had my book deal kind of secured already pretty much, which, came out on May 4th for anyone who isn't aware. It's called Built to Lose, How the NBA's Tanking Era Changed the League Forever. A lot of Celtic stuff, like early Brad Stevens era and stuff like that, really highlights like 2012, 2016 NBA. But so I had that.
Drop that link in the comments right now.
There you go. So I had that deal, and I was a feature reporter at SI. Like that's how I built my connections and relationships around the league primarily. Like I got to meet a lot of people who work for teams, who work for players, who just are around the league in some capacity. In a feature writing, like here's a cutesy story about a bunch of friends and some type of Miles Turner playing Legos, like stuff like that ended up, I got to meet a lot of people and they got to meet me, and it developed a lot of trust. And then I was freelancing for Bleacher Report the 2021 season, and 2020 2021, 2019 2020, and then
last 2 years
the COVID season, and sometime in like January, February of this year, my editor, Chris Trenchard at Bleacher Report, came to me and said, we love working with you, but we can't have the feature stuff anymore. We need rumors. And if you want to do that, we'd love to have you bring that to the table here. So that's kind of what, I focused on the last, 6 months. I mean, I was writing stuff like this all year long. If people want to go back through my author page on BR, like we wrote about the Magic getting ready to sell all their players at the trade deadline before they did. We wrote about, Kristaps Porzingis potentially becoming available at the trade deadline. We wrote about the Houston Rockets getting ready to sell and tank just like they did. So there's a bunch, and we wrote about Kyle Lowry like potentially being traded at the trade deadline very early in the season, and talked about his looming free agency. So it's the draft and free agency has just always been the biggest height of all this stuff, right? And the draft has been something that I've covered since 2013. Like that's how I got really my start. I was interning at Slam Magazine in New York, and there like wasn't that much for me to do. They kind of said like make this internship what you want it to be, And from there, I covered the draft and got to meet a lot of agents and players. And that was kind of my foray into the league in that regard before I started meeting people on the team side. And then, draft week is really a huge gold mine for intel because the teams want to know what other teams are going to do, and everyone's more secretive and misleading than ever. And I kind of function as I try to look at myself as functioning like the 31st front office in the NBA and gathering intel to, use in my own trade talk and free agent talk and all that type of stuff and trying to figure out. So to the point now, I have agents and team people calling me saying, "What are you hearing? Like, where is this guy going to go?" Just like, not saying everyone is calling me, but a good portion of people that I know definitely want to reach out to me to hear what my intel is, just as much as I'm trying to learn stuff from them. And I think, there's never been more right now based off of being in this rumor space, and that's kind of how I've been able to bring some stuff the last couple of weeks.
He's Jake Fischer, read him at Bleacher Report. He's been at SI, like I mentioned, Liberty Ballers, Boston Globe, Slam. You said like before that SI layoff is when the book sort of came together. What really pushed you toward that? I know you wrote about like the experience you had been through during that time and meeting some of those early architects of the process and, the salary cap gurus who have entered front offices here and stuff like that, just along your way through the reporting here. But what made you, it's kind of an interesting topic, but an obscure one. Like what made you think like, all right, tanking, there's going to be a book about this, the lottery, the odds, the percentages, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm from Philadelphia originally. I was covering Liberty Ballers, the Sixers at Liberty Ballers, like you mentioned. So, I mean, being with Slam, then I covered that 2013 draft. Sam Hinkie, dropped the bomb and traded Drew Holiday and started the process on draft night. The Celtics traded KG and Paul Pierce to Brooklyn the same night, that 2013 draft. People forget at Sam Hinkie started the process, and they were
a very unpopular trade at the time too.
Yeah. They were rebuilding and tanking for the 2014 draft class, just like the Sixers were. And being in school in Boston, I was at Northeastern, and then after that internship with Slam, I had a credential going to TD Garden. Like every night there was a game, I was there, and I was writing, fun little features back even then. Like I remember there was one time. Chandler Parsons, when he was with the Rockets, he had like a vicious pump fake, and I went up to him in the locker room and started asking him about his pump fake and did like a whole story just on that. And like he laughed about it and wanted to talk about it. Kevin McHale was the Rockets coach at the time. Like he laughed at me, like, "Why are you asking me about Chandler Parsons and his stupid pump fake?" But like that's the kind of stuff that made me stand out to some people because they knew I was actually like paying attention and like asking questions that weren't just, "So what'd you see out there? Talk about this." Like I actually am coming with an observation and a question about it, So so like being in Boston, being from Philly, covering those two teams, like when they came together, it felt like a Super Bowl of losing. And you also had Ryan McDonough in Phoenix and Rob Hennigan in Orlando and all these other analytical minded executives like Pete D'Alessandro in Sacramento and David Griffin in Cleveland. Like there was a moment at that time where all these analytical dudes come into power. It was kind of like an identity crisis around the league. A lot of the older basketball hoop heads, guys who played, they're like, "Who are these nerds coming up on our shores and storming our castle? Like, get the hell out of here, man." So that was a moment that I thought was so noteworthy, and it really was an undercurrent that was rippling throughout the league that I just wanted to encapsulate in a book. And kind of, again, the draft is where I got my start. So it's been pretty easy to it was easy to kind of just peel back the curtain so deeply from those three drafts, 2013, 2014, 2015, and then fill in all the backstory and the context, in between those and the people involved and the human interest stories that happened along the way.
Yeah, so we could kick around all day, like the process and tanking and the merits and all that stuff, but the league did eventually change those odds. The last couple of years, it's been way more of a mixed bag at the bottom there. And it is interesting to me that you still see teams like Houston this past year and even the Knicks the year before that. I think the odds had changed at that point. Maybe not. Maybe that might have been the last year of the old odds. But
the Knicks was the first year. The Knicks was the first year in 2019.
All right. So there was the greatest example of all. These teams still feel like going to the bottom's worthwhile, even though I think it's just a 20 or not even 25% chance anymore. It's under that of getting that number one pick, even if you're the worst team in the league. So the Knicks fail. The Rockets did not get K'd this time around. Like, where's the thinking now on tanking, that process, the whole thing you wrote about here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of, the title is how the tanking era changed the league forever, right? And I think the lottery reform is obviously one aspect. I think the play-in tournament was also instituted partially to urge teams to not tank and to give them, a couple more opportunities to get into the postseason. And I think a midseason tournament could play a factor in that as well. But I also think the tanking era with these analytical executives and planning out and just like really trying to streamline the process of getting superstars to win a title, like that has permeated the league now. And look at this summer, look at all the moves. Russell Westbrook to the Lakers, Spencer Dinwiddie to Washington, the DeMar DeRozan thing to Chicago, Kemba to New York, the Ben Simmons and Damian Lillard dominoes hanging over everything. Like this league is all about collecting stars and putting them together and trying to compete for a title right now. That's where it's at. And I think the tanking era and those teams in the middle of the 2010s, like really emphasizing that this is how you win. I think that has just swept the league. So you spin it forward to today, like you're right. It's only a 14% chance now for those bottom three teams, like we talked about. And Oklahoma City, Houston, Detroit, Orlando this year, they were far more brazen than anything Sam Hinkie ever did. Sitting Al Horford and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for a half the year, and same thing with John Wall in Houston. And people didn't even realize Terrence Ross was just like sitting on the bench in Orlando too. Like that was nothing the Sixers ever did. They put out their best lineup they could. Brett Brown was trying to win every single game. They were just built so badly they didn't really have the capability to do so. So I think tanking is alive and well because when you get someone like Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown, if you just get Joel Embiid, if Cade turns out to be one of those guys too, then you're set for a decade plus of at least having a shot at being a contender. From there, it's about mixing and matching and adding those other all-stars like we've talked about. But I think the dividends are so obvious, even though the lottery is so hard and so much luck is involved. If you scout well enough, you can get Paul George and get some luck. You can get Paul George at 10 or Giannis at 15 or whatever. Obviously Jokic got picked in the second round too, but like traditionally and historically, the numbers say top 10 pick is always where you see these stars. Top 5 is, even a greater chance. And as long as that's the case, and as long as you have something to do to control that, teams are going to lose games on purpose.
I think the other interesting angle of that too is teams trading all their picks the way they have. Like you mentioned, going all in for the organizations and the GMs that are all the way into this, Houston, LA, these different teams that have done it, Brooklyn most recently. Like they're just willing to, I know you can only trade on the off years. They try to get rid of trading all your picks into the future, but teams have pretty much gone the other way and saying, all right, we'll just do the pick swaps. So effectively, I know on our Garden Report program, I'm always like, you got to trade 7 picks to get this guy. You can't trade the 7 picks, but you do the pick swaps, and that's what teams have done. It's interesting to see like what layer that's going to add in the story that you talk about here, because teams are effectively throwing out their entire futures for the next year or two. A good percentage of teams in the league now have done this at this point. I wonder where that's going to go. Like, do the rules on trading picks get even tighter in the years to come? I mean, does this work for these teams? Does this end up paying off for the Thunders of the world? It's going to be interesting.
Well, I think, on the winning side of things, on mortgaging your future side of things, look at the Lakers, right? They won the title in 2020. They stacked this roster with, a couple of guys who make a lot of money, and then you fill it in with veteran minimum type people. And if it goes well, like you win the championship. If one of those guys gets hurt, if there's some type of dysfunction, like it can go very poorly. And I think that's the perils that come with building a roster, with so many high salaried, high priced guys. But look at Brooklyn, like even when they got out in the second round this year, predicting they're going to be the number contender this year. They're the favorite right now for the title. Like that is absurd. The team that they lost to, but won the championship, is not the favorite. It's them. So as long as you have that star power, you're going to have a real fighting chance. And that's again why all this, this tanking, this team building, this roster construction kind of conversation. That's why we're having.
All right, so let's get into our scoops. This is what the people are really here for. And, it wasn't the most interesting team. It might have been the least interesting team, but people are going to want to know, what the hell are the Celtics doing? Like, it's just days of silence. All of a sudden, Kanter comes through. Everybody in the fan base freaks out because they dumped a pick to get rid of him, and now he's back. And that's effectively the only thing they've done here in this free agency period. They had maybe that full mid-level to work with. They're not even going to use the smaller mid-level if you, according to this Mark Murphy report the other day. And everybody's looking at Bradley Beal. Everybody's looking at the free agency space next summer. But you see what Washington's doing. I don't know if it's going to be a sure thing that Beal's out there next summer. So a lot of people are really wondering, what's the plan in Boston?
Yeah, I think, it's important to consider. Imagine if the Al Horford Kemba Walker trade happened this week. I don't think people would really be acting like they did nothing, right? I think that is a pretty key thing to keep in mind. I mean, they obviously moved off of Tristan Thompson, which I think was a goal of theirs dating back to the trade deadline. So that's an accomplishment too. I think I said this earlier today on a Spotify Green Room thing. Like, we got to also keep in mind that a franchise isn't just about the 15, 17 players that you have on your roster. There's all the coaching staff, there's the front office, and you've got a first-time president and a newly hired head coach who's over in Tokyo right now playing in the Olympics. And from what I was told, they've kind of put a freeze on hiring coaches, to Ime's staff since he's been away. And it just sounds like they're definitely going to be bringing in a general manager under Brad Stevens. That's kind of where it's been the intel all along here this summer. And the Landry Fields rumors have not died down. So it's not just about the roster. It's about also, all three factions, players, coaches, and executives at the franchise. And that's also, you can't just be signing everybody too. So I think that's kind of my full encompassing intel dump on where Boston stands. Like, the Al Horford deal was pretty important for them. There will be more changes made and adjustments on the margins of the roster, but there's going to be changes also to the coaching staff and the front office that are just as equally important that I think they're focused on too.
What do you think of the Richardson move for them? I mean, Dallas pretty much effectively dumped them. They got Moses Brown back, which was pretty good. A lot of people love Moses Brown here in Boston, and they were bummed to see that. But Richardson, it's funny, you go back and look at the articles that were written about him a couple of years ago. He was one of the fastest rising second-round picks and prospects in this league with Miami, and then he just looked like a bad fit in Philly and then a really bad fit in Dallas that just didn't work at all last year. Is he going to be able to make a leap with this team, you think?
Potentially. You're right. He has not found that stride that he had with the Heat. And I think the three-point shooting deterioration has been unfortunate to see. Like, he was a really good shooter in Miami. So, maybe Boston's got an opportunity to bring him on. And clearly he's someone that Brad Stevens likes. And he played against him in a playoff series and stuff like that. And I know they were looking for wings. Like, I reported the Kyle Anderson concept too, because for days I've been hearing it's either Josh Richardson or Kyle Anderson, Josh Richardson or Kyle Anderson. So I felt that was noteworthy and at least enough to point out that they were clearly looking to bring in another wing, another starting caliber wing. And it just seems to be that Josh Richardson's the guy they got. And I think he's going to play a lot of minutes this year. Yeah. So if you factor in the Josh Richardson, Al Horford stuff into this offseason, they've done a couple of moves.
Do you think the Tristan trade's going to go through pretty much as is? I know that got held up a little bit.
I don't know. I mean, at this point, teams are using the sign and trade provision as an opportunity to expand deals, and they don't have to become official until August 6th when the new league calendar begins. So that's kind of where things stand. But for now, I think Monty McNair and the Kings are definitely still being very active, from what I've heard. So it sounds like maybe that's just kind of where that deal is at right now. It's just being left open-ended in case the Kings can add something else on. That's our Boston too. I just think they're leaving the door open. There's also a very strong chance just it gets announced officially as it's been reported so far right now when August 6th is said and done. I think they're leaving the door open to expand it.
Well, that's effectively what the Wizards did. And the Wizards, it was so funny. Shepard talking a couple weeks ago, saying when they were talking about the Beal trade request possibly going through, saying that, we're going to add to this roster. We're going to build it up. We're going to do this and that. And everyone was kind of laughing because you get your mid-level, you don't have any cap space, you get all this money loaded on, and all of a sudden the Westbrook trade goes through. They're bringing back Kuzma and Harrell. They're making stuff happen with Dinwiddie, and it becomes a 5-team trade in the end that I think actually makes this Wizard roster look a little compelling. The East is tough. Dinwiddie's coming off an ACL tear. The defense was bad there last year, and I don't know if this makes it much better. But what's the thinking in Washington right now in terms of Beal's future? Is this kind of like a prove-it year for him to show that the roster can compete? And what do you think of the pieces that they brought in here?
So I think sorry. Sorry, what team again? I got distracted.
Wizards.
Wizards. Yeah, I think the Wizards. You're right. The Bradley Beal trade request situation. I obviously reported that on that Saturday before the draft. Like his situation was being impacted by Russell Westbrook considering a trade too, and that's ultimately what happened. He requested a trade and got to the Lakers. So from there, it was pretty clear, and the messaging that Washington was sending and everyone around the league was hearing was Bradley Beal is not available for trade. He has not requested a trade, and while he's here, we're going to continue building around him and trying to build the best team we can. And they did that, I think, right now with Spencer Dinwiddie. They put a lot of risk in his health, $18 million a year for 3 years on someone who's had a lot of injury concerns in the past. That's a risk. That just is what it is. But if he's able to stay on the court and perform at his best, like he has been in Brooklyn at times, like that's a great signing and someone I think Bradley Beal has a good relationship with, and KCP is someone who Bradley Beal is supposed to be very close with. So they've got a group of guys now that are similar age, similar timeline to him, at least close with, and they're talented. I think they got better this summer for sure.
What do you think Beal's thinking is at this point? Like, he has been very loyal to Washington, and it's been amazing to see the amount of different incarnations of that team he's worked with there, and the opportunities he's had to leave at different points, like signing an extension, now effectively giving them another year, it looks like here. Is this just going to kind of be like a wait-and-see year for him, or do you think he's locked in beyond this even?
So I think, there's a general expectation right now that Bradley Beal will sign his Supermax extension next summer. I think it's a lot of money to turn down, 54.
Mm-hmm.
And, dating back to Anthony Davis' situation in New Orleans before he requested the trade. People in New Orleans were definitely encouraging him, like, hey, man, sign the Supermax right now, and then we can trade you after. Get your money, but just sign it now, and then we can trade you. I think that's probably what's going to happen with Bradley Beal, too. Again, I'm not saying he's probably going to get traded, but I think he probably will take that Supermax because he has been so loyal to Washington and has never really shown, fully interest to leave. He was definitely considering it. There's a lot of people talking about Bradley Beal being on the fence more than he ever had been before. And that's why I felt it was necessary to report that, because I also really felt that the Russell Westbrook trade request was a real thing too, and look how that turned out, right? So I think where things stand right now, they're going to continue to hope that Bradley Beal stays happy and will be signing that Supermax, and then they'll reevaluate next summer.
Two more teams I'm interested in, or two more moves I'm really interested here. Starting with the Bulls, Lonzo Ball. That was such an interesting fallout there. I have a million questions about that move. Like, why New Orleans wasn't more interested in keeping him. I know there were reports within the last few days that Zion was pretty close with them, but never really felt like the Pelicans wanted to keep Lonzo here. And then they did in my mind, a shaky sign and trade here where you bring back Satoransky, who's a good player. I like him. Garrett Temple, good player. I like him. They gave up a first to get Devontae Graham in there, and as part of like this big series array of moves here. But I was so confused all along why there just wasn't more interest in keeping him there. And I know Boston was kind of looped in on Ball too, but was it Chicago all along for Ball in his mind? Like he was just always dead set on Chicago?
I think so. I think Chicago's been dead set on him. There was a lot of talk back at the trade deadline that they were close on a deal that would have brought Lonzo out to Chicago. And I think he's an ideal fit next to Zach LaVine, especially when you consider Nikola Vucevic's own defensive deficiencies. Lonzo can guard 1 through 3. He doesn't need the ball in his hands in the half court. He can go stand in the corner happily and shoot 40% from 3. Like, that's a point guard I want my team. That's a point guard obviously Chicago wanted, offering $485, I think is the final number right out of the gate. The fear for them the whole time was just, would New Orleans match? And I think New Orleans did a good job of holding the Bulls' feet to the fire and getting some picks back. I mean, by all accounts, I really like Thomas Satoransky. Maybe Thomas Satoransky is even New Orleans' starting point guard this year. Like, I don't know. It could be. So where things stand right now, people in the league are curious if they're going to sign another guard. But at this point, it doesn't sound like they have much more up their sleeve. I think this is pretty much going to be the core of what New Orleans is next year.
The Lakers, how are they going to look? Westbrook, I know it was kind of an awkward thing with him and Harden there. They brought in a million different role guys here who can shoot a little bit, who can score on the side, protect the rim, stuff like that, and Dwight. But I am just curious of what this is going to look like. Like, is Russ going to be playing off LeBron off the ball here? Is Davis going to be playing more center? I know you wrote about a guy like Kendrick Nunn, who I'm really curious how he's going to look when he ends up in this situation here after kind of getting cast off by Miami after a few awkward seasons. He really looked good, before the playoffs 2 years ago, and then had a decent season this last year. So that's an interesting one for me. And then Malik Monk's kind of in the same place out there. Showed a ton of promise at certain points in Charlotte, but effectively just got cast off, and now he's in a prove-it deal in LA. Prove-it deal in LA. It's a interesting mix out there because this could either be a runaway championship team or a team that really just struggles to fit its different parts together when you think of Westbrook's fit out there. Why did they get away from the old championship core of 2020? I know they had already lost some pieces from that in the year that followed toward this Russell Westbrook-centric core.
Well, I think going into the 2020-2021 season, the Lakers clearly showed that they wanted to find someone who could be a primary creator instead of LeBron. LeBron is getting older, right? And I think he's obviously only getting older. He's got a birthday coming up, in December, right? And I think also with Anthony Davis's injury history, like they need someone else who can create. And that was the goal with Dennis Schroeder at the time. They definitely wanted Dennis Schroeder to be this Russell Westbrook figure that they really wanted to go out and get this summer. From what I was told now the last couple of days, like I don't think that 484 Lakers offer was even like a hard offer. I think they were just having that early conversation when Schroeder first got traded and said, this is what we're kind of thinking here. And I don't think the conversation really got that far. I think they kind of turned it down before it even got to being a legitimate offer. But that shows what the Lakers' belief was at the time. They thought Dennis Schroeder was going to be someone worth that money, and around with the Lakers for a long time. He had just come off like a 6th man of the year type year, right?
Does he even fit on this roster now?
I'm saying at this point, I don't think so. And I think he didn't during the season. That's why they really were set out on they were using him in trade talk with the Raptors at the trade deadline to try to get Kyle Lowry, right? So and I think at this point, it doesn't sound likely that he'll go back to the Lakers either. I'm very curious to find out where his landing spot is going to be. At this point, I don't really know where it could be. But I think the Lakers' number one goal this summer was absolutely to get that third star, that someone who could really run the offense. There's obvious overludes to Chris Paul and the connection between LeBron and him always wanting to play together. And they got Carmelo. They were pretty close. They're pretty close to reforming, the banana boat crew. If they were to get Chris Paul, right, maybe they would have pulled Dwayne out of retirement too.
Dwayne Wade, yes.
But there was always going to be difficulties in getting Chris from Phoenix. The Suns in general offering more or having to help the Lakers get him, that was never going to really be something I saw happening. So Russell Westbrook became, a big, and he would have, as Ramona Shelburne reported excellently on ESPN.com, I would encourage everyone to check that out. Russ has been has had a lingering interest to go back to Los Angeles for a while. And when this opportunity became available, he pounced on it. So from there, like when you stack that roster with so many high-priced guys like we've talked about here, like you really only can bring out, mid-level type money people and veteran minimum type money people on your team. And the Lakers have shown like Kendrick Nunn and Malik Monk and Carmelo, like guys they thought they had a shot at Rudy Gay, and they thought they were going to have a shot at DeMar at the mid-level too. But, clearly there's been enough guys, even Kent Bazemore, who have decided to go to Los Angeles they've all said for less money than they had on the table elsewhere. So it's the Lakers, it's LeBron, it's a title run. Like that's kind of where they stand right now.
I'm excited for round 3 of Dwight. Melo ring as well would really round out his legacy. Last thing, Ben Simmons. That's the one on everybody's probably number 1 spot right now of what's going on. The rumors you hear of the asking price is enormous, but you also tend to think with the report today that he's basically out of touch with the organization and a number of other things that have gone on here that he probably won't be back on this team next year. So how does this one end out, you think?
I think Dale's done a good job at this point of doing what he can to boost Ben Simmons' trade value. And I think his value in the league is far higher still than it is publicly. I mean, people still view him as a 25-year-old all-star, defensive player of the year runner-up who's got 4 years of guaranteed money left on his contract. And with that in mind, I think, that's just all what it is. And you add in the extra factor of Damian Lillard potentially becoming available. Daryl Morey is not going to trade Ben Simmons right now for something that isn't a Godfather package that he could turn around and send for Damian Lillard. That's just where it is. And I think until that happens, I don't expect him to make a move. I think they're going to wait this Damian Lillard situation out. And the Olympics end on Friday for men's basketball, so they'll be back next week, and everyone will be in summer league, and that'll be the big talk in the hallways of the Thomas and Mack Center. And from there, we'll see what happens. But for now, they're holding out for an offer that is going to be very, very rich, and I don't know if that's going to come anytime soon.
Anything else going on out there? I know there's not many free agencies left. I know there's been a few phone checks on here. Is there any news to break on Dome Theory before we get you out of here? What's left on the market, really?
I'm still curious to see where Kelly Oubre lands. I think he's someone that he got priced out of this market just like Schroeder did, and I think he's still someone that he's young and could really help a team right now. So I'm curious to see where he ends up. The market of teams that were apparently interested, the Dallas, San Antonio, Miami, New York, there's not much money left out there. So I'm curious to see where that ends up.
Markkanen too, no clue. Him, Schroeder, all these last guys out here seem to be pretty stuck when it comes to this market. It was a tight one this year. So Jake Fischer, thanks so much for being here on Dome Theory. Thanks for taking some time out of this free agency period to check in with us, and go get his book over on Amazon. I dropped in the chat. I'll drop it again over on our Dome Theory page. So thanks, Jake. We'll talk to you again soon when you're less busy.
You got it, man. Thank you.